What is it? What was that? What was that one, Ross? Was that She Loves You? I've got news for you, Ross.
No,
that wasn't She Loves You.
It was Day Tripper.
Day Tripper, of course. I knew as soon as you said it would come straight back to my mind. Today we are celebrating Beatlemania. It's 25 years on Sunday since Beatlemania hit Australia. And for 2.5 weeks, those lads from Liverpool created unprecedented hysteria in this country. They'd had hit records, we'd heard them, the kids had gone crazy about them. A man called Ken Brodziak had them coming here to Australia for little money per week in comparison to what they were going to get in months to come. But no one realised just the depth of popularity they enjoyed here in Australia. You might see an unusual face there. Ringo didn't make the trip initially. But we'll talk more about that and many other things concerned with Beatlemania as I introduce to you well-known Australian rock historian Glenn A. Baker. Just thinking, Glenn, all of us on the show today, in deference to the Beatles, we should have been wearing our little fringes, shouldn't we? Should have pulled the
plastic Beatle wigs that were going for, I think, about 7 and 6 then.
Did you buy one?
I think I had one, but it was thrown out by my mother at a sort of a weak moment. I think they now go for probably about $75, as does most elements of Beatlemania.
It's big business. Well, indeed. Glenn, where do we start? I guess with that initial thing that I mentioned, that when they first arrived here in Australia, there was Paul, there was John, and there was George, of course. There was no Ringo.
There was a fellow by the name of Jimmy Nicol, who had been a member of Georgie Fame's Blue Flames and had been recruited a matter of days before because during a recording session, Ringo came down with a bout of tonsillitis, was rushed off to University College Hospital. The Beatles didn't only have to play in Australia, they had a very small European tour. So they rehearsed Jimmy overnight, whipped him off to Copenhagen and Amsterdam, then to Hong Kong, and he even had to play in Adelaide because Ringo's throat was not getting any better. But he joined them in Melbourne. Ringo came in, and there's the wonderful photographs of 5 Beatles at the Melbourne press conference. But they made pretty short work of Jimmy. Once Ringo was back, Jimmy was given £500, a gold watch, a handshake, and was basically never heard from again.
And Glenn, there was this magnificent photograph that appeared in the Australian press, and I think it won awards, and rightly so. There is Jimmy saying farewell to Australia, and I know the bloke who took that shot. For the life of me, his name won't come to me, but that was not staged. Oh, no, that's how he was sitting at the airport.
And when you think that 2 days before that, he had been part of what was the greatest outpouring of Beatle devotion ever. So the Beatles in February of 1964 had gone to Kennedy Airport in New York, and 10,000 fans had met them, and they thought that was great. They arrive in Adelaide 4 months later, and there are 350,000 people in the streets to see them. Adelaide at that time had a population of about 500,000. So it wasn't only teenagers. It was, sort of like mum and dad and uncle and the dog. I mean, everyone was there to see the Beatles, and no scenes in Liverpool, London, New York ever during the entire span of Beatlemania ever eclipsed what happened in Adelaide.
Glenn, it's a hard question, but you're a rock historian, so you've got to be prepared for it. What was so special about the Beatles? Was it promotion? Was it their talent? Or was it their luck?
I think there was a certain irreverence about them. There was a certain cheekiness. We've been used to seeing acts like the Vienna Boys Choir, the Luton Girls Choir, who all sort of sat there politely in press conferences and said yes sir and no sir. Well, the Beatles got into their Sydney press conference and they started twisting questions around and tossing them back. And you had old media warhorses like, Chuck Faulkner, who would sort of asking all these really imposing questions, and they just sent him up mercilessly. And I think that we were at the bottom of the world. We were this colonial outpost. The 60s really hadn't filtered through to us. We still really didn't know about all this new sort of like liberation attitude of lifestyle that was occurring in the big cities of the world. So the Beatles were a tangible manifestation. We could almost reach out and touch them. This was the brave new world for all us baby boomers who were in fact coming of age then.
Glenn, a very good friend of mine and indeed a pioneer of Australian television, Jeff Cook, he covered the arrival of the Beatles in Melbourne for GTV9, And, I mean, he's never seen scenes like it before in his life, and certainly not since. He's told me on a number of occasions, the Beatles as blokes, he actually stayed in the same hotel as them a couple of doors away, that they were very, very lonely people.
Well, they were. I mean, they could go absolutely nowhere. I mean, in each city there was rumours. The Beatles will go to see an Australian rules football match. They'll go to a barbecue in the hills. Or they never got to... They did nothing. I mean, they just sat in the rooms and really vegetated. And it was no wonder that by about 1969, all the Beatles said, "We've given enough. Please let us sort of out of this." And, I mean, they stopped touring, in fact, in 1966, 2 years after they were in Australia. But strange things were happening. Well, it wasn't only kids screaming outside. People were wheeling cripples into their presence and virtually asking the Beatles to actually touch them and cure them.
I believe the Pope was furious. What about Glenn? We all know, we remember the start of the Beatles, and I've got this vague vision in my mind of there being trouble eventually with the boys and arguments within the group itself. But eventually, Glenn, why did they break up?
I think they broke up because it was the ultimate men's club, wasn't it? I mean, those who were around them at the time of Beatlemania said you could never get in. They were the tightest unit imaginable. They only answered to each other. Even Brian Epstein was never quite privy to it. But as John Lennon explained, he said, boys clubs eventually disintegrate because you want to go off and get married and have families and do other things and see other people, and you don't go down the pub with the old boys every night like you used to. And I think it's just sort of a natural evolution. I mean, people blame Yoko and they blame Linda for it. I think you've just got to blame the fact that they were growing up and that they'd in fact... I mean, how can you lust for more fame when you've had the sort of fame that brings 350,000 people out in the streets to see you?
Who was the nicest of the blokes?
Paul was always the most genial, but those who have got close said the geniality was a little bit of a thin veneer. John was, of course, always the most caustic, but people have said that underneath the cynicism was, in fact, a much more sort of sturdy personality.
And who was the most difficult?
George was often difficult because George, being the youngest, was a bit intimidated by what was going on. George got upset at people throwing jelly babies at him. George got upset at people screaming in the streets because he sort of felt he didn't deserve it. Ringo was just a happy-go-lucky knockabout bloke that no one ever sort of got close to because I don't think he ever let anyone get close to him.
Personally, I like George very much. He's my favourite Beatle for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think he's very underrated, talent-wise. And secondly, I know he quite often visits Australia, and he may be here right at this very moment. So, George, if you're watching, all the best to you, mate.
Sorry, George.
Yeah, sorry. Glenn, if you had to explain to somebody who'd never seen the Beatles before, just in a line, how would you explain that phenomenon, which was the Beatles?
I would explain the Beatles as a phenomena that was about youthful vitality at a time of great unease. I mean, there was the Cold War, and it was a time of uncertainty and of dullness, and the Beatles were brightness, vitality and energy.
As we thank Glenn A. Baker, some memories now of the four mop tops themselves. Back with you soon on the Bert Newton Show to pay further homage to the Beatles.